All right, in this video, I'm going to be going over part 2 project help. So here is that project Google Doc. Remember that you should have already made your copy of this and it should be in your Google Drive. If you have not, go ahead and go to File, make a copy so you can type on it. Part 2 starts down here. So for part 2, we have the same exact scenario. So Jade and Juliet, they're still riding their bikes. They still rode these 2 different miles on the first 2 days. And then the 3rd day moving forward, they are going to be riding their bikes 62 miles per day. Okay. And then it tells us the entire trip. This is how far they're going the entire trip. So part 2, question 1 wants us to create an equation to determine how many more days Jade and Juliet need to ride their bikes to complete their trip. And it says, be careful you are not looking at the total number of days, but the number of days after the 2 days. So for this question here, we have to think about, well, how many miles did they ride on their first 2 days? So the first day they rode this 45.4, and on the second day they rode this 56.3. Okay, so if I were to combine those 2 days, I could add them together. Okay, so our equation would start off with us adding those 2 numbers together because this is essentially their starting point. Okay, then from that day moving forward, they're going to ride 62 miles per day. Okay, so if they are riding 62 miles per day, I have my 62 and my x. My x represents the amount of days that it's going to take them to finish riding their bikes. And remember, it says it is an equation, so I need to have an equal sign. And then what goes on the other side of my equal sign is going to be their total. So the total is how many miles they are going to be biking. And if I look here, I see that 2,878 total miles. That's their entire trip. So that's going to be my total. That's what I'm going to put on this side over here. Let me zoom in to make this a bit bigger. There we go. Okay. So this looks a little bit weird. Let's add these 2 numbers together. I'm going to open up Desmos. And the 2 numbers I'm adding is 45.4 and 56.3. And that gives me this 101.7. So I'm going to replace this with 101.7. So this equation is what we are going to be using for the rest of this project and also to help us answer the rest of the questions. Number 2 says, how many more days do Jade and Juliet need in order to complete their trip? So what we want to do here is we are going to take our equation and we are going to solve it. Okay, and I'm going to change the order just to make it a little bit easier. And I'm going to put our variable first. So from here, it's a very simple solving 2-step equations. Okay, we're going to subtract the 101.7 from both sides, and then we're going to divide that number by 62. Okay, if you need help on this step, let me know. But again, we're literally just solving for this x here. Okay, so all we're doing is solving for this variable for number 2. So this is not your final answer. You need to solve for the x. Okay. For number 3, it says, describe how you created your equation from number 1. Well, that's kind of just saying what we verbally discussed. So we started with how many miles they biked, then attached a variable to the 62 and set it equal to the total number of miles they needed to bike. And then part number 4 says to explain the process that you used to solve the problem. Again, when you're explaining the process you used to solve the problem, that's explaining how you answered this question up here for number 2. So again, in number 2, all you're doing is solving this equation here for x. And in 4, you're explaining how you do that. So it could be something like, I subtracted the 101.7 from both sides, and then I divided those 2 numbers by 62 to get x by itself. Something like that. And that is it. This is part 3. We're not going to be doing part 3 quite yet. So once you finish part 2, then you are all finished. Hopefully this doesn't take you too long. Again, if you have questions on how to solve this equation here for part 2, please let me know.